Oh, hey everybody. We're here at the Hoboken Historical Museum, coming to you live on Facebook and YouTube. Um, our show tonight, as it is on Thursday nights, it's Hoboken Talks, where we talk to people about Hoboken. It's a great conversation, it's a great town, and we're really thrilled to be into season 5 of Hoboken Talks. More than 100 hours of conversation about Hoboken. Check out our YouTube channel. That's where we take care of our videos. Look at all these great people who have been there. That's only 9 of them. Like I say, there's probably 100 people that we've spoken with. It's worth it to check it out. And we're really thrilled tonight to welcome Caroline Leavitt. And she's going to be talking with Jeff Tamarkin. Let me just push a button and I'll hand it over to Jeff. All right.
Okay, well, thank you, Rayanne.
Thank you so much.
Before we start, I just want to say how honored and thankful we are to be guests together on Hoboken Talks. It's really interesting to me to be in this position because Caroline and I have been married for over 30 years, and we both do interviews, both as interviewer and interviewees. But in all of this time, we've never interviewed each other. So this is really interesting and enlightening. And we're both looking forward to seeing what comes out of this. Maybe we'll both learn something new about each other. Who knows? Before we start, though, I have to clear up one thing. If you're watching this show and you are looking for Caroline Leavitt, who is the press secretary for Donald Trump, you're in the wrong place. She is Caroline Leavitt with a K, works for Trump. We don't. We have nothing to do with him. We don't like him. But let me just get that out of the way so you can go watch MAGA Talks or whatever. I'm going to read Caroline's bio here, which might take half the show because she's so incredibly accomplished. Caroline Leavitt is the New York Times bestselling author of 13 novels, including Pictures of You and Days of Wonder. She's been praised by the Washington Post, the New York Times, Oprah Magazine, the New Yorker, the Boston Globe, and more. And she was longlisted this year for the Joyce Carol Oates Literary Award, given to an author for their whole body of work. Caroline is also a New York Foundation of the Arts Fellow, a recipient of the Midatlantic Arts New Jersey State Council of the Arts Award, and a finalist in the Sundance Screenwriters Lab. Not done yet. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Modern Love column, New York Magazine, The Daily Beast, and more. She's reviewed books for the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and currently reviews regularly for People magazine. Caroline also teaches story structure for the novel for UCLA Writers Program Extension, and does developmental editing for authors both privately and at reedsy.com, reedsy.com. She is the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, a unique organization of over 30 passionate professionals, which started the day of lockdown, connecting readers with writers with live interviews and special events. And she's lived in Hoboken since 1992, married to yours truly, Jeff Tamarkin. And we have a son named Max who lives in Brooklyn. I'd like to go back, all the way back to your childhood.
Oh.
You say, let's talk about, you were born in Quincy, Massachusetts, and grew up in Waltham, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston. This is where you lived.
Yep.
What was your family life like there, and when did you know you first wanted to become a writer?
It was really difficult back there. We were, for some reason, my father thought it would be a good idea for us to be the only Jewish family in a 1950s Christian neighborhood where everybody was worried about communists and all this kind of stuff, and so they were very suspicious of us. So when I was a little girl, I grew up with kids running up to me saying, where are your horns? Or, you killed Christ, or all these other things. And it was really, really difficult. So I grew up feeling pretty much like a black sheep. But because I also had really bad asthma, I couldn't play outside with the other kids so much. They would be out bicycling or whatever, cycling or whatever, and I would be in the library reading. And after a while, I realized I didn't want to just read books. I wanted to write them. And I wanted to write them about little girls like me who had asthma, who were brave. And that's what I started doing. And I began living in my own dream world.
Why fiction?
Because I can't quite tell the truth. I mean, it's always, if I see something, I think, oh, well, what if this happened? Or what if that happened? Like, there's a picture of me as a little girl, and I'm sure I was thinking that the neighbor's dog was my dog, and what if I kidnapped it, and then we went this place, and that, it's just the way my mind works.
I always say that I write biographies and,
Right.
and journalism, so I always say that I tell the truth and Caroline lies.
That's right. It's absolutely true.
What was your parents supportive of you wanting to be a writer, or did they want you to do
Not really. My father wanted me to get married and be a housewife. My mother also wanted me to get married and be a housewife. And she thought that writing was a really nice hobby that I could do in between, raising a passel of kids and putting dinner on the table. Gradually, my mother became proud of me later on. Although when I did get my first New York Times review, my mom said, "The New York Times in New York?" So I had to explain to her that, yes, it was in New York. It was not in Cleveland. It was in the New York. And then she became very proud. But it took a long time.
Okay.
And that's me and my mom.
That's you and your mom, yeah. I know you weren't published until you were an adult, but did you
Right.
write while you were in high school?
I did. I did. I wrote and I sent stories away when I was in high school too. And of course they all got rejected. And all of my teachers always told me, "You're never going to make it. You're not going to be a writer." And I just said, "Well, yes, I will. Yes, I will." But I never published anything, even in college. I went to Brandeis and I had a very famous instructor who was best friends with Philip Roth, and he used to hold my papers up that I wrote like this, like they were garbage, and say, "Now, what's the best place for this?" And he would put it in the trash. And I would cry, but I kept coming back every single day.
Did you ever get to show him your work?
I did. In fact, after I got out of college, I wrote my first novel. It's right up there with the tan, the top shelf. It's tan, Meeting Rosie Halfway. And to my surprise, it became a huge sensation. And I took one of the books and I wrapped it up and I sent it to him and I said, "See, you were wrong."
That's great. That's great.
It was wonderful.
Yeah. When you lived in other places before you moved
yeah.
to New York and you went to other colleges, how did that contribute to your craft?
It did a lot because it made me feel that there were possibilities. When I first went to Brandeis, it was still in Waltham, and it was like, it was too familiar. So I happened to visit a friend of mine who was going to school in Ann Arbor. And as soon as I walked there, I thought, "Oh my God, I have to be here." There are 40,000 people. They all looked interesting. There was everything going on. And I decided I wanted to be there. And I took writing courses there. And I worked for a literary magazine there. And I never wanted to leave. But unfortunately, I fell in love with somebody. And we moved to Pittsburgh, which Pittsburgh right now is supposed to be a lovely place, but back then it was not. It was kind of a cultural wasteland, and I was really, really unhappy. But the good thing about Pittsburgh is that it gave me the time. My first husband knew I wasn't happy, and he said, "Well, you can just sit here and write." And that's all I did. And I produced another book, and that's what I did. And I stayed there until the marriage fell apart, and then I moved to New York City, to Manhattan, where I always wanted to be.
Why New York? I mean, you weren't from here. You weren't familiar with the city.
It had a cachet. I thought, I had friends there. I thought, well, if I'm in New York City, I'll be a real writer, and which of course is ridiculous. You're a real writer anyway. That's me in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
That was the Picture magazine did. But I just thought, if I was in New York, I would be a real writer, and I loved everything about it. I loved being in a teeny tiny little studio apartment with a slanted floor. Everything was really cheap when I moved there. I just felt like I didn't decorate anything. I didn't want any kind of domesticity. I just wanted to be wild. And it was the 1980s, and I was wild.
Well, that's what New York was for in the
That was what I was
1980s.
There's me against post
That's
no
great. I love
bills,
that picture.
being tough and being wild. I was probably on my way to a club
Probably.
at 11 o'clock at night, and then after the club, I'd go to the Kiev and have breakfast at 4 in the morning, and then wake up and do whatever job I
We've
had.
talked about the possibility that we probably rubbed
probably
shoulders
did,
with each
yeah.
other in those clubs because I was going to the same
We went
places.
to the same, Danceteria, Mud Club.
Yeah,
Couldn't get
yeah.
into area. I wasn't cool enough. But all those places I
Yeah,
loved.
yeah.
Loved.
Like every other writer, I'm sure you had your share of rejections before you actually got published and started getting somewhere.
You're
What was
telling me, yes.
that didn't discourage you at all?
No, because I knew that every writer got rejection, and I was determined. And the more people told me, give it up, go back to school, be a teacher, be whatever, I kept saying, no, I can't, I have to do this. And I sort of knew that I could do this if I tried really hard and if I didn't give up. And I quickly learned that, a writing career is rejection. My first book did really well, Meeting Rosie Halfway. It got a film option from Paramount. It was in every single newspaper. I was interviewed everywhere. I was on TV. I was translated into 16 languages. And I was so naive, I thought, oh, this is always going to happen, and it would be great. And the second novel did okay, but not as well. And then novels 3 to, I would say, 8 tanked.
Wow.
They totally tanked. It was, I bounced around to publishers, and I didn't know what to do. And on my 9th novel, which is, it's on the top shelf, it says Pictures of You, there's 2 versions of it. I wrote it as part of a 3-book deal for St. Martin's. And on the 3rd book, they called me up and they said, Caroline, we don't really like this book. We don't think it's special. And I absolutely froze, and I said, what can I do? How can I make it special? And there was a silence, and then the editor said, we don't think that you can. So I cried because I knew if you have all these books and you don't have a lot of sales anymore, and what was I going to do? So I cried to one of my friends in the writers community. She had just been with Algonquin, a new press, and she gave the book to somebody there, and they said, oh, we love it. And I said, well, I don't sell books. And she said, you will now.
Right.
And they took that non-special book and they got it into 6 printings before it came out. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 3 weeks, the week it came out. And the editor, who had told me it wasn't special enough, actually called my agent and said, would Caroline like to come back to us? And I said, no, thank you, that's okay.
Too late.
So I have a very sort of, I feel like success is nice when it happens, but it's not everything.
I'm always fascinated with people's early careers, and I know that
Oh,
you
yeah.
won an award before you published Meeting Rosie Halfway,
Yeah.
which really kicked things off for you. What was
Yeah.
that about?
It was, there was a magazine called the Young Writers Contest, and it came out of Redbook Magazine. And back then, Redbook Magazine was very prestigious, and they published a lot of really good writers. And the cutoff was like you couldn't be older than 26. And I thought, I don't have a chance in hell. But I sent in a story, and back then, there was no email, so you got your stories back in big brown envelopes. And as soon as you saw them come back, you knew, no, it's a
Right.
no. So I got this big brown envelope back from Redbook, and I thought, I just can't. And I ripped the whole thing up into confetti. And then I said, oh, great, I have to clean it up. So I bent down, and I saw this part of the thing that it said, congratulations, you won first prize. And that just jump-started everything.
Yeah.
It was all of a sudden, agents wanted to know me, editors wanted to know me, other writers wanted to know me, and I was just sort of dazzled.
Yeah, I know this is probably the question you hate the least, but where do you get your ideas? Where do you get your inspiration? I mean, you've written 13 novels, and somehow you always come up with an idea for the next one.
I always think it's not so much where you get your ideas, it's sort of like what is haunting you at the time and making you crazy. My very first book came out of the fact that my sister, who I adored, who was the coolest person on the planet, smart, a great writer. She gave it all up at 19 to marry this guy who I absolutely hated. And she got pregnant right away and moved to a terrible town. And meeting Rosie was halfway was really about a lot about my feelings about losing my sister, because I felt I lost her. So that came that. My latest novel, Days of Wonder, came about from a conversation. I was just talking to Victoria, my friend Victoria, and she mentioned that a mutual friend of ours had something to tell me. And I said, oh, what? You know, she's a really nice person. And Victoria said, well, she murdered somebody when she was 15. And
That's
yes,
unbelievable.
she did it, and she didn't regret it, and she went to prison for it, where she turned herself around, and she developed this whole new career, and she kept her life private. And then when she hit her 40s, somebody outed her. They actually made a movie about her, and she began to lose everything again. You know, nobody wanted to have anything to do with her. And I thought, that interested me a lot about how do you gain forgiveness when people blame you, and what if you don't even know if you deserve it, or how do you recreate yourself? And so that was the book.
I read all of your books, and I'm trying to think if there is a thread that goes through all of them. Is there one thing that binds all of them together? And if I had to focus on one thing, I would say conflict.
Yeah.
There's every one of your books, sooner or later, somebody's in trouble.
Somebody's really, they're always in trouble, or they always die, or they're always.
Why?
What's the
What's the obsession with that?
I guess because I always wonder, how do you get out of that? I mean, I've had things in my life where, you know, where I've almost died, but then I didn't, or terrible tragedy happened and then I worked through it. And I always feel like there's two paths you can go to in life. You can go to the path where you say, like, that's it, I'm not doing anything anymore because I'm not going to get hurt. Or you could go to the other path and say, you know what, this path is really more exciting, I'm going to try it, and if I get hurt, I'll figure it out. But yes, I'm not particularly nice all the time to my character.
I know, you usually kill them off, actually. Have your books ever gotten you into trouble? I know you had mentioned there was at least
Yes.
one bizarre tale where you were sued.
I was sued.
What happened?
Yes, it was actually my first book, Meeting Rosie Halfway. I had chosen names for the characters that I wanted were all Americans, so it was Rosie, Ben, and B. Nelson. You know, like the
Like
Nelson,
Ricky
Ozzie,
Nelson
and Harriet.
and Ozzie.
And they lived in Boston, and the story was two sisters, and one of them had a mental breakdown. And there was so much publicity around that book and so much excitement. And then all of a sudden a subpoena comes through the door.
Wow.
This family named Rosalind, Benjamin, and Eleanor Neiman
It wasn't Nelson,
accused me.
no?
No, it wasn't Nelson,
Okay.
it was Neiman. They accused me of, you know, telling their story, because they said, well, we lived in Boston and you must have known. And I was just so upset. And I told the publisher, well, I'll sue them back. I mean, obviously that's an insult. This is a book about me and my sister, and I just used generic names. And they said, you know, you're gonna have to change two of the names for the paperback, because otherwise it's going to suppress the book. And there's so much publicity, you don't want to do that. So I changed. So if you look at the paperback of that book, it's not Ben B, it's Len and Lee.
Wow.
And I hated to do it, but I did do it.
You were channeling something that
Yeah,
you didn't even
channeling
know.
something.
I want to go back to inspiration one more time. And, you know, I've known you over 30 years, and I can say I've never known anybody who knows as much about the movies as you do.
I do,
And,
I
you know,
do.
you and I watch a movie almost every night. I say we probably
right.
watch 5 movies a week,
Yeah.
and have since we met. And you go back way before meeting me. You've probably seen 10, 20,000 movies. Do you feel like you're inspired by all these films you've seen? And you're the only
Absolutely.
person I know that can see 5 seconds
And I
of
know
an
what it
old
is.
movie and say, oh, that's, you know, such and such.
Part of it is from childhood, because, you know, I had asthma, so my mom would plunk me down in front of $1 million movie, and I watched every single Betty Davis movie. I watched Waterloo Bridge with Vivian Leigh. I was totally traumatized by Splendor in the Grass with Warren Beatty and Natalie Wood, and I always try to have a Splendor in the Grass ending, you know, because I love that movie so much. And I just watched them. And when I was in high school, I would go to the movies. Well, I lived near Boston, so I would go to the movies every day. Orson Welles Cinema, and just see movie after movie. And of course, in New York, it's like movie paradise.
Yeah. So let's move more into the current era, by which I mean the 90s.
The 90s.
That's the current era to me. We met in 1990, early
Yes, we did.
1990. And
There it is.
through a personal ad, which you can see, the
So
one that's circled, in New York Magazine, and that was Caroline's ad, and I wasn't really looking, but I happened to look that week, and I said, "Oh, that sounds interesting." So anyway, we met. We had our first date in the Village, and unlike every other date I've ever been on, we sat down at a table in a cafe, and you took out a bunch of wind-up toys
did.
and set them loose on the table, and I said, "That's for me." I said, I definitely need a second date with this one. So after that, we've pretty much spent all of our time together, and
really
most of that
fast.
time in your apartment at the time, which was in Chelsea.
Chelsea, right.
Tell us about some of the crazy times in that Chelsea apartment, because some of those stories are just epic. They are books in themselves.
We lived in this apartment in Chelsea.
West
had
22nd
one
Street.
It had, I hope this is PC enough, one window.
Oh, God.
That was a beautiful big window, and it faced another window across the hall. So one day we were sitting on the couch, just, talking and fooling around, and I looked outside and I saw this guy. He had a blind over his face. The rest of him was naked, and he was
Doing stuff.
pleasuring himself. And I said to Jeff, "Is that guy doing what I think he's doing?" And Jeff said, "Yeah, this is really weird." And he was doing it for hours. And I thought, this is really weird. He was doing it every night. Everybody in the apartment seemed to know who he was.
Oh, yeah, that guy, sure.
Yeah, they knew who he was. So I wrote a nice little note saying, "Oh, I don't know if you realize, but we can see what you're doing every night." And I figured out what apartment he was, and I slipped it in. That night, he took out the strobe lights so he could do it. And he kept doing it and doing it and doing it until one night we ran into it, and Jeff said really loudly, "Isn't that the guy that
Yeah.
shows himself off in the window every night?" And the guy froze and ran.
But I remember once we decided to call the police on him, and
that's right.
the cop said, "Lady, don't look."
They said, "Lady, don't look." we had a horrible landlord the night before we were supposed to leave because we were going to move to Hoboken. We had everything sort of packed up, and I noticed the ceiling above us was buckling, and water was starting to drip down. So I called the landlord, and the landlord said, "Stop being so hysterical, Caroline. Just close the door and forget about it." But we kept seeing the thing coming down. So I called the locksmith. The locksmith came and found that this guy had put up 6 deadbolt locks. Took the guy
The locksmith, yeah.
hours to open it up. When he opened it up, it turned out that the guy, who was a guy who lived above us, who used to clog every night at
That's
3
right.
in
We had
the
a clog
morning,
dancer living on
had
top of
left
us.
every spigot on. He flooded the whole apartment. He came through our apartment and went down in the basement, and then the next day we were gone. It
was a fun place. I want to pay tribute to Minnie.
Oh, right.
Now, Minnie
right.
was Caroline's pet tortoise.
Yes.
And this is another sign that we knew we were meant to be together,
Right.
because the first time that we had dinner together in Caroline's apartment, we were sitting at the table eating spaghetti,
Pasta.
and in the middle of the table, the tortoise was eating worms. And,
I'm so
this is like life with Caroline Leavitt. You get used to it real quick. I said, okay, this is different. At some point, we decided to be together. We needed to move
Right.
out of that tiny
We did. We had to
buckled
move.
apartment, and Manhattan was prohibitive.
It was so expensive.
And
we just
plus, we
couldn't
needed
find
a
it.
lot of space. We both worked at home. We both had a lot of stuff,
And we wanted a child.
and we wanted a child. So after not too long, we determined that Manhattan wasn't going to work.
Right.
And we ended up looking in Hoboken. And at first, you did not want to leave Manhattan.
I did not want to leave Manhattan. I went door to door to places, trying to find a place where we could live. And they were 2 million, or they were this big, and it was just so wearisome. And I said, okay, so let's look other places. So first we looked in Brooklyn, and I thought, well, at least it's New York. But the F train from Brooklyn back to Manhattan was a royal pain, and I hated it. It took like 40 minutes. So Jeff said, well, let's look in Hoboken. And all my friends were saying, because this was the 90s, they were saying, Hoboken, really? So we went to look, and the first day we looked, there was something like 33 houses to look at. Half of them were these gorgeous brownstones, and the rest were these 4-story row houses, brick row houses, and they were all affordable. They were all affordable. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to take this leap. I'm going to take this leap. And we bought this house that was called, the realtor called it, remember, the Miracle
House.
And she called it the Miracle House because she felt it was a miracle that anybody would buy it, because it was all wood paneling. Well, first of all, the outside was all painted gray.
Right, like the one next to it.
Inside it was all cheaply wood paneled, orange shag carpets, lowered ceilings. There was one room that had a kind of nice chandelier, although it was painted black.
It was painted black. The
And we
staircase
figured
was painted black.
The staircase was black.
The Addams
yellow.
family lived there before us.
And we figured, well, we can do cosmetic stuff. And it turned out that when we got there, once we pulled down all the wood paneling, there were fireplaces in every room. Some of them were marble. When we pulled down the lowered ceilings, there were these gorgeous rosettes and moldings, and underneath the
black
rugs,
right underneath
under
the
the linoleum and the rugs, were these gorgeous wide plank
pine floors.
Yeah.
And the chandelier was paint. Once you
was
stripped
brass.
off the black paint, it was brass. So we had a little gold mine there that
We had a real gold mine, and I always felt like that the house was flirting with me, and then it made me fall in love with it, because it's such a great house. It's got so many beautiful old details, and we're kind of lucky that the older owners covered them up.
Yeah.
Because they're in perfect shape. They're just in beautiful, beautiful
It
shape.
took 9 months to renovate the house, and then we had this gem that Caroline described. But the neighbors were not always, in the beginning,
Right,
they were a little bit
right.
suspicious of us,
Right.
because there were a lot of people like us, young people, moving to Hoboken, who would come in, have their kid, and then move to the suburbs. And we told them we weren't going to do that. We were here to stay. And 33 years later, we're still there.
We're still there. Yeah, they were very suspicious, especially since I believe in the 80s they were burning people out of brownstones, and people would just sort of wander in our house without being asked and come out. And it wasn't until I was really hugely pregnant that one of the neighbors down the street said, "So you're moving, right?" And I said, "No, we're not moving. This is our community." And it was amazing, because the next week she brought me over this gorgeous, and I still have it. It's a knitted little blanket for the baby, and the neighbors started bringing us stuff. And as soon as the baby was born, they couldn't have been nicer or more wonderful or more of a community.
Very
It
supportive.
was just great.
Yeah. Karen Listener, local
Hi,
local
Karen.
writer of renown, is asking, will this ever be part of a novel?
It was. It's in my novel. What the heck? What's the name of that?
It's one of them.
It's one of them. I think it's Coming Back to Me.
Okay.
Coming Back to Me. That is like very autobiographical about what it was like. We had the guy who lived next to us. There's actually a scene in that novel because the guy who was next to us used to shoot off these really dangerous fireworks over the 4th of July, and he didn't like that. So he sued us about it. He didn't like our fences.
Right.
He didn't like anything that
Didn't
we
like
did.
anything about us,
No,
basically.
he didn't like anything about us. He
Yeah.
kept saying he was going to find the tortoise and kill it. So, but they moved out.
Yeah, that's right. So you and I both work at home.
Yes.
Still do. We've been doing it for
Yep.
over 30 years. We have offices across the hall from each other. And what would you say are some of the advantages to doing that? We have a great commute
Right.
of about 3 minutes. But other than that, what are some of the advantages of working at home and
It's-
just the two of us together, really?
Well, the truth is, I love to be with you 24/7. I
Same
just
here.
want to be with you all the time. So it's nice when I'm working and I can get up and then I just look and there you are across the hall, and I can wander over and bother you or tell you knock-knock jokes or ask you a question or
Knock,
on my
knock.
computer.
Wait, knock knock.
Who's there?
The
The who?
they just retired today. Anyway, Eric Hammer is asking what's the age of the house. The house was built in the 1880s. No,
Oh,
1880s.
1880s.
Actually, the further you get into Hoboken from the river, the newer the houses get. So if you're on, let's say, River Road or
Yeah.
Hudson Street, they're a little older than that.
In fact, we should have brought photographs of this. When we first had the house, somebody came by and said, "Can we dig in your backyard?" And we said, "Why do you want to do that?"
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, because people used to use those as their outhouses and also their garbage. They would throw things in. There's old glass bottles. You can find old pipes.
Yeah.
So we let them do it. And we
And-
got these cool things out of there.
Yeah.
The coolest thing was a little Benjamin Franklin snuff box, but the guys who did the digging claimed that.
Yeah, they made a deal where they would
made a
take the
deal.
stuff that was valuable and leave us
Yeah.
the rest, and we kept most of it. But a bunch of bottles. With,
Yeah, we have a lot of hair oil
Hair-
bottles,
hair restorers and-
a little angel.
There's some great
It's
stuff.
It's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
House has history.
Yeah. Sticking with Hoboken, how has Hoboken informed your writing? Do any of your stories include scenes that took place in Hoboken? Or is it more of a peripheral thing?
It does. Well, coming back to me was all Hoboken. That was like the whole, all Hoboken neighborhood. And things always come in. I used to write a lot about Hoboken. Now I'm back to sort of writing about New York, but I just watch things and I put them where I think they should go.
Including people.
People, including
Yeah,
people.
it could be dangerous knowing Caroline because
that's
you
right.
might
I
end
will
up in
write-
one of her books.
I tell people, if you make me pissed, I'll write about
That's
you.
right, yes. So far, I haven't made the cut, but there's always a first time, I'm
That's
sure.
a person.
In 1996, well, let's
yeah.
say we bought the house in 92, we moved
Yep.
in 93, got married in 93, and 3 years later, out popped Max
And Max.
Tamarkin, and who is now 28 years old, almost 29.
Yep.
What was it like? There he is.
There he
That's one of our crazy
It
Halloween
was
costumes.
wonderful. It was so, I always thought like, I wanted to bring up a child in New York City, but then I started hearing stories where childcare is so expensive and there's no schools, and we really lucked out. We were one of the first people that got into the Elysian Charter School, which was very different than what it is now, and it was such a great, diverse place. And we also found a wonderful woman who could be a nanny for a while, so we could work, and it was a safer place, and Max loved the parks. And in fact, when Max was 5, there was some kind of Hoboken festival in Church Square Park, and somebody put out a chessboard and taught us the few moves. And Max and I sat there playing chess for like hours until the guy who was teaching chess came over and said, "Do you know you guys are playing chess for 5 hours? Would you like to really learn?" And we both did. And actually, Max became a chess champion because of Hoboken. He was third in 3rd grade.
Yeah, he was actually 3rd place in the entire state of New Jersey for his age group at one
And
point.
he now teaches chess.
And he teaches
still
chess
teaches
in Hoboken.
Yeah, in Hoboken.
Yeah. So, what are some of your other Hoboken memories from those days, the 90s?
The 90s?
Let's say pre 9/11.
Oh, pre 9/11.
Yeah, because things changed after that for sure.
Things changed. Well, this was us at our house. Somebody actually, I wrote an article about moving from Manhattan to Hoboken, and so somebody came and took a picture of us here, and that was in the magazine. And I remember when that was in New Jersey Magazine. I remember somebody actually wrote in a letter saying, "Yeah, let's see if you stay here." I said, "Well, we are going to stay here." I just remember it got. After Max was born, things got more child friendly. Actually, there were more schools, there were more activities, there were more restaurants. It started to very slowly become a place where people wanted to live. And the good part about it was, you have better restaurants. The bad part about it was the rents started to increase.
Everything, the
But
taxes. went up,
the taxes. It was very hard to get people to come and visit us at first. And then when they did, their jaws would drop open because they were all living in these tiny little New York apartments. And they'd come in our house and say, "Oh, wow, this is really something." But it was I don't know, I just loved it. I just loved it more and more every year.
Of course, we would always tell people, don't drive
Yeah,
to
don't drive,
Hoboken.
don't
You
drive
won't
to
be
Hoboken.
able to
There's
park.
not.
And they say, no,
No, no.
I'll find a space.
No, they won't find
Hour and a half later, can you help me find a parking spot?
Yeah,
That
well,
hasn't changed at all.
No, I
In
love
fact,
every bit.
when we first moved in the 90s, I believe the population was around 30,000, and
Right.
it's
Now it's a
creeping
lot
towards
more.
double that now.
Yep.
So that's one
Yeah.
change.
I especially love the St. Anne's Parade.
Mm-hmm.
When I was pregnant, all the ladies, all the older ladies, now we're the old one, no, I'm the older
Yeah, we're the
ladies,
old
but
timers.
back then, all the old ladies and the old timers grabbed me and took me there, and you said, you have to put $1 up, then you have to say, St. Anne, send me a man. And I said, but I have a man. And they said, well, it's for your baby. So I did it.
Okay. Speaking of children, you also write children's books,
Yes,
which
I do,
not a lot of
I do.
people know. You've written books for the Wishbone series.
Wishbone
Tell us
series.
what Wishbone is.
Wishbone was a little talking dog on PBS, and he imagined himself in classic things of literature. It was a hilarious TV series. Wishbone would jump up, he'd dress up like the Prince and the Pauper, and he would have all these wisecracking things to say, and they wanted somebody to write books about it. So I said, well, I'll do that. I'd love to do that. So I did a few of them. I did the Haunted Clubhouse, which was based on an Agatha Christie novel. And I forget what the other one I did, what it was. Oh, Robin Hound Crusoe. And the funny thing about Wishbone is you got to use a lot of dog puns. And they had a whole Bible of stuff you could say and you couldn't say. And my favorite dog pun of all, which I'm really proud of, is Wishbone is walking down a little alleyway, and he's sniffing, saying, oh, it smells great around here. Then he turns the corner, and there's all this teeming garbage. And he said, and look at the scenery. It's so beautiful. It was a really fun job. But they gave that job up because the money either had to go to Barney or to Wishbone, and the TV station
Same
decided
company, right.
Purple Dinosaur had to
Yeah.
have it.
You briefly mentioned Pictures to You and the success that book enjoyed after quite a drought.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what that book was about, and why do you think that book took off the way it did?
I don't know. If I knew, I could
Duplicate it.
I could duplicate it and do it again. I really don't know. At that time, Algonquin Books was this amazing place that was famous for taking people whose careers were not going so well and boosting them up. And people just responded to the book. The book is just about two young women fleeing their marriages on a foggy Cape Cod road, and they bang into each other. And one of the women, a mother, dies, and the other one, single woman, lives. And there's a little boy who is hiding in one of the blankets. And the woman who caused the accident is so guilty. She tries to do stuff for this family, the husband and the boy, and she starts to love them. And there's all these complications. And turns out the woman with the son had a suitcase in the car, and nobody knows why. And I don't know why that book hit. You can't know. It was just like, people just went nuts over it. And I kept trying to study and saying, like, well, why? What was so good about it? I don't necessarily think it was better than any other book I wrote, but they did. They did.
Do you have a personal favorite of the books on the top shelf or your novels? And you've also been part of many anthologies and.
I do actually. I really like Cruel Beautiful World because it's kind of my time a little bit. It's set in the time period when 1969 was all the flower children, and peace and love and women's power. And then and it was such a fun time to live in. And then all of a sudden it became 1970 and there were the Manson murders.
Well, that was 69, but right.
Right.
Yeah.
Then there was Altamont, and
Right.
people stopped hitching. And at the same time, I was thinking of this girl who had sat in front of me in high school. Her name was Nancy Cripps. She was just a lovely young woman, but her boyfriend was 36 years old. And I always used to say, Nancy, you're like 17. She said, no, we're going to get married. And what happened is when I graduated high school, Nancy decided she wanted to go to college. And she told her boyfriend, Her boyfriend came to her house when her older sister was supposed to be there but wasn't. Came to her house and Nancy said, I really think we want to break up. I want to go to college. And he went into the other room and got a knife and he stabbed her 65 times and left her there. Then he went to the reservation and somebody saw him jump in and they thought, oh, he committed suicide. They never found the body. They don't know whether he really did kill himself or whether he's still there. Nancy died, of course. Everybody was devastated. I couldn't believe it. But the really interesting story has a modern component, which is that Nancy's sister never forgave herself for not being there. And Nancy's sister was supposed to marry this really nice guy, and she just couldn't. She became an alcoholic. The guy became an alcoholic. And then somebody sent me something like, I guess must have been like 10 years ago. The two of them ran into each other. They were both newly divorced, and they fell in love again, and they got married. So they're together now, as they should have been all those years ago.
It's another Caroline Leavitt feel-good story.
Yeah. I always give hope at the end.
I know
always
you
give
do.
hope
That's
at
true.
the end.
They always end on an up note.
You have to have
Not
some
always.
Not always.
Sometimes you kill people
But at
off.
least like possibility.
So
of
we've lived
something.
through quite a bit of history in the 30,
Yes, we
30
have.
plus years we've been here. And
Yeah, we
like we
have.
mentioned before, 9/11, and more recently the pandemic,
Oh, boy.
which of course was devastating to all
Devastating.
creative people, especially, it made it impossible to get out there in the world and
Mm-hmm.
do what you do. But you actually managed to turn that
All right.
that downside
Right,
into
right,
something
right,
positive.
Right. That-
Talk about A Mighty Blaze. What is it? Why does it exist? And how did you come up
Okay.
with it?
It was in March, and I was due to go out on tour for my book, With or Without You. I had a 40-city tour set up. I was supposed to fly out the next day to Houston to talk to 100 librarians. My publisher at Algonquin called me up and said, we're really sorry, we're canceling it. And I said, you're canceling it? What, are you crazy? They said, no, we're canceling everything. Everything is canceled. So I hung up the book thinking, I hung up the phone thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And first I walked around saying, nothing is canceled. Nothing is canceled. I'm not going to do this. I made a whole speech with hand movements.
Right.
So I made a little video of the speech and I sent it to my publicist. And I said, look, this is what I was going to do. And he said, that's pretty cool. I'm going to send that to the librarians. And I started thinking about it. Well, how can I help my friends? And I put something up on Facebook and I said, look, I'm starting the Nothing is Canceled book tour. This is how it's going to go. All you have to do is send me a 1-minute video, call out another author, and you have to call out an indie bookstore, and I'll put it up. I thought I was going to have like 20. I had like 200 in one day. And I was doing this for a week with like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And I got a call from the Washington Post. And Ron Charles called up and he said, Caroline, what are you doing? And I said, I don't have any idea. I don't know. And he said, well, keep doing it. So I was very lucky that this other writer, Jenna Blum, called me up. And she's very, businesslike, which I am not. She said, would you like help? And I said, yeah, I need help. So we formed together. We decided to call it Mighty Blaze. And we were going to just connect writers with readers, with indie bookstores. And then Jenna said, well, we have to have a press release. So she did all that. She got the Authors Guild. We were written up in the New York Times. We were written up at this other place. We were written up at another place. You have to understand that I've been fired from just about every job I've had. I'm just not good at this stuff.
Right.
But Jenna was good at it. So my job was to find the writers. And I thought, oh, well, we need really big writers. And I tried to remember from my reviewing days who was big who I reviewed. So I thought, I didn't review him, but I wrote a letter to John Irving a million years ago, just telling him how much his book meant to me. And he had written me back and said, oh, you didn't ask for anything. That's so cool. That's why I wrote you back. And I thought, okay, I have to write to him again. So I wrote to him again, and I said, I hope you remember me, blah, blah, blah. This is for a really good thing. Please, will you come on? And he said, well, I don't know. I have to see all the questions. And I wrote out all the questions, and he vetted them. And he came on, and he was totally charming and great. On the other hand, we have David Duchovny.
Right. Tell us about that one. It's quite a
I
story.
got David Duchovny because I had reviewed one of his books, and I wrote him and said, look, I reviewed your book, and the Boston Globe gave it a rave. Just come on, this is an important new thing. He said, oh, all right. He didn't really want to do it, but he did it. So when we did it, everyone at the Blaze was watching, and we thought he wasn't wearing pants. He was just doing his shtick from the top over. But he did do it, so there was that. I mean, we've had people who they were not good interview guests, or
Right.
they were drone on, or they were scared, or they would leave. But so we just built it up. We
Yeah.
now have 30 volunteers. We have about 10 different shows, from romance shows to, I do lit fic, which is just books I like, and Friday Frontliners, which are the big names. And Jenna does everything else. She does the budget and everything else that can be done. I'm just good with getting writers to say yes.
You've been the subject of interviews for your own books your whole career, but
Yeah.
this puts you in the position of being an interview, and you've talked to people like Katie Couric, Anne Lamott, Richard Price. Are you
Price is
intimidated by these people, or are you,
Not anymore.
Yeah.
I was really intimidated with John Irving because he
Yeah.
was my first. But by the time I got to somebody like Richard Price, I was, I wasn't at all, because I figured, okay, all I have to do is make him laugh. I figured if I can make people laugh, and then they'll relax and they'll be fine. So I told Richard to come up like 10 minutes early, and he came up and he's just in a flannel shirt, and I said, oh, I have 2 Richard Price stories. And he like brightened up and he said, oh, what did I do wrong now? And we laughed, and I told him this, I told him this story about that I had gone to a club and they let him in, but not me. And everybody was saying, oh, there's Richard Price. And he turned out to be absolutely charming, and we had the best time.
That's
best
great.
time.
That's great. Your most recent book is called Days of Wonder. You talked
Yes.
about it a little bit before. A little more though. Could you go into more about what motivated you to write that
Yeah,
book, and
yeah.
what's it about?
Yeah, okay. There's, this is my
Yeah.
NPR thing, Scott Simon. Yeah, this again was something that somebody told me. My friend told me about a friend of hers that she thought I would like, and everybody loved her, and she was an older woman. And I said, great, I'd like to know her. So I talked to her on the phone, I really liked her. And then after a while she said, I have to tell you something. I am actually one of the people from this infamous movie that came out. I did a murder when I was 15, and I served time for it. And of course my jaw dropped open, just dropped.
Not something that comes up in casual dinner
No.
conversation.
And I started to think about it, but I didn't want to write her story because she had had so much trouble with people outing her, and even like lately people would uninvite her to stuff because they still considered her that 15-year-old murderer, even though
Yeah.
it was a million years away. So I talked to a friend of hers and I said, look, I have to write this, I'll make it different. So I made it into a Romeo and Juliet story. The original story was her, one girl. I made it into a boy and a girl. Class elements, the boys from a very rich neighborhood in New York City, the girl's from a poor neighborhood, her mother is like an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, and they fall in love, and the father does not want them together and does everything he can to separate them, including deciding to move. So the kids are the kids, and they're just talking, and they're just saying, well, you know what, maybe he'll fall down the stairs. And it becomes a game. Maybe he'll fall down the stairs.
Nice kids.
Yeah. He has a heart condition. And they said, oh, maybe he'll have a heart attack. Maybe one of his old clients, because he's a judge, will come and shoot him. And they're just fantasizing and fantasizing until one night they stop fantasizing and something happens. They don't remember the night, and the rest of the story is about, well, it's about justice. She goes to prison and he does not because he has money. Neither one of them really remember what happened until the end. It's just about, it's like typical Leavitt themes, like how do you find your way back
Right.
from disaster and be a better person for
Right.
it.
Okay. You are incredibly busy. You, besides writing these novels, you
Yeah.
teach writing online at UCLA.
Yeah.
You have private students.
Yeah.
You do book manuscript editing
Yeah.
for
Yep.
Reedsy and private clients.
Yeah.
You review books, as we said before, for People Magazine and other outlets. I get tired just thinking about all you do. How do you find the time in an average day to do everything you do?
You know the answer.
I know I know the answer,
I'm
but-
very anxious. I'm very anxious.
yeah, I
I
know.
have to be doing something.
Yeah.
In fact, like when Jeff went on a business trip to Norway, I didn't know what to do with myself, so I reorganized every cabinet in the kitchen, and I reorganized my socks and my earrings and stuff. I'm happiest when I have a whole lot of stuff to do.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
whole lot of stuff to do.
You've written scripts also,
Yeah.
and you're writing one now.
Yeah.
And you have mentioned that at one time Madonna was supposed to option, or did option, your fourth novel,
Yeah.
Into Thin
yeah.
Air.
Into Thin Air. It's
And-
like right up there on the top
Right.
shelf. Yeah.
And nothing came of it, unfortunately. You also won 2 finalist shots at Sundance.
Yeah.
So far, you have, the way you put it was, Hollywood has broken my heart.
Hollywood
What's the
smashes
deal?
it.
Why aren't your books in the
Because-
theaters?
Because it's so expensive to make a film, first of all. And there's so many people that have to make up the thing, and there's always somebody who leaves. I had a movie option where the director ran away with the lighting person,
Wow.
and that fell apart, and then it's hard to get money, and then a producer will be, I mean, I had Farrah Farmiga who was going to produce and direct Pictures of You. And then just before I had the contract sent to me, she was offered the Bates Motel.
Yeah.
And that was that, of course. So you just, I mean, you never know. You
Yeah.
just never know. It's
Yeah.
just kind of it's like winning the lottery if you get a movie.
Yeah, okay. Where can people find your books, and how can they contact you if they
I'm
want to?
I'm so, this is my very first one.
Uh-huh.
People can contact me at www.carolinelevitt.com. Make sure
With a
it's
C, not a K.
Not a K. I'm on Facebook with a C, not a K. I'm on Instagram with a C, not a K. I'm on TikTok with a C, not a K.
I wish he would fire her already, so you stop getting these
You know,
emails from crazy people.
I made a video when this first started, which was, "Hey kids, want to tell the difference between the 2 Carolines?" And I had a picture of her, you know, she's blonde and all that, and it said, "Caroline with a K is blonde. Caroline with a C is brunette.
Right.
Caroline with a K bans books. Caroline with a C writes them." It's easy, try it. And it didn't seem to work because I still get email for her every
Yeah, yeah.
day.
Okay, you have another novel finished,
I do.
and you have already started work on the one after that, even though the one before it
Yeah.
hasn't even been found a publisher yet. You want to talk about either of those, or are you
No.
suspicious about that? I thought so.
No, I don't want to
I
talk
don't
about
blame
The
you.
only thing I will talk about is that the earlier novel called The Inseparables it's set in the 1980s in gritty New York. And the interesting thing I found is that I posted up a few photographs of me in the 80s and you also, and people loved that. And somebody alerted me to a Gen Z site where all these Gen Z people were talking about the nostalgia they have for a life they've never lived.
Yeah.
They keep thinking, oh, it would be really great not to have cell phones or social media. What would it be like to have a real conversation with somebody and not have to do it texting? And I just thought that was really, really interesting.
Tell me about the research that goes into some of your books. I think the one you're just finishing now was set almost 100
20s,
years ago,
yeah,
over 100 years ago. How much research goes into? Is that fun for you, or is it pain?
I thought it was going to be terrible because, as you know, I used to be a whole lot shyer than I am now, and now I'm sort of not afraid of anything. So the research is always really interesting because you get to talk to people and they tell you stuff. For Days of Wonder, I met this guy who he's a district attorney in Brooklyn, and he was going to take me to see an arraignment and. Excuse me. I love it. People have really weird stories and I love to listen to them.
Okay. What else haven't you done that you would still like to do?
I would like to to have a movie made. That would be nice. And I would like to act in a horror film.
You would like you. It's really weird. She loves horror films.
I do.
I'm not a big fan. It's usually the other way around, but more power to you. And final question. This is one that we did not prepare for.
Uh-oh.
We watched a special on David Blaine the other night,
Oh, yeah.
the magician and illusionist, and he did some incredible things like
Set fire to his head.
set fire to his head, jump, eating glass. All the. If you could do one thing that David Blaine did
And not be hurt.
and not be hurt or killed doing it, what would you like to do?
I don't want to put fire in my head. I don't want to go under the ice. I would go simple. I would want to do like to tell you, like pick a card, blah blah blah, and then when you find it, say like, go look, it's on the back of your head,
Yeah.
and the card would be on your head. I want the simple stuff.
I don't blame you.
Simple stuff.
That is all we have. There's the great.
There's my favorite quote.
That's an actual quote, and
Yes.
this is great.
This
and,
is really wonderful.
unlike every other interview I ever did, I get to kiss the interviewee.
That's right. Thank you so much. This was so wonderful.
great.
I
We
really
had some
appreciate it.
pictures we didn't share.
Oh, let's show them.
Oh, we
and
did.
then
Oh,
we
let's
can tell
see
you.
them. Let's see the pictures.
We can
did
lie
share.
about what they're about.
Oh, Max's
that was
bar mitzvah.
Max's bar mitzvah at Maxwell's. I talked about this when I was on the show with Todd, who ran Maxwell's at the time. And this was the only bar mitzvah that ever took place at the legendary Maxwell's in Hoboken. That's my immediate family and
And my mom.
and Caroline's mom over on the left.
The
And
parents were appalled, but the kids were.
the kids had a great time.
Heaven.
We invited all the kids from Max's
Yeah.
Elysian grade, and they all came in their finest finery, and they did stage diving and all sorts of cool
They
stuff.
did. They did.
My mom did not do stage diving, neither did Caroline's mom.
No,
but
they were a little disappointed. They wanted it to be at Leonard's at Great Neck. or
yeah,
whatever,
they would have
but it was
preferred.
perfect.
You know,
The kids loved it.
yeah, the
Loved
kids
it,
had a
loved it.
great time. Yeah.
My
More
son-
recent. That's Little Italy, I believe.
I think
and
it's
that's
in Little Italy.
with Max, about a year ago maybe, when we still had more of the outdoor eateries,
Yeah,
as they were
100%.
called. And Max will be 29.
Yep. He's my horror show partner.
Yeah,
Max will
that's
go see
right.
horror
Yeah,
shows.
yeah. He's an actor and
Chess master.
chess master and all sorts of
And
other stuff.
really a bookaholic. He
And
reads
yeah, he's
everything.
a voracious reader and,
Yep.
and a great guy. Max,
Great
you're a
guy.
great guy.
Yep, we love you. That's Scott Simon from NPR. We became friends on NPR because I would tell him bad riddles. And so when my book came out, he said he would do a session on it, and he did. So I got to be on All Things Considered.
And that is it.
That is it.
That's it. That
All
was
right.
great. It's great.
All right. Let me push a button here and I'll take over.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. That was
Thank
really,
you,
Thank
really
you so
great.
much. That was really
Thank you.
fun.
Thanks so
You
much.
were good.
You
You guys are looking good. All right, Jeff DeMarkin, Caroline Leavitt, thanks so much. Let me talk about what's coming up. We have Charlie Lopez come with in a couple of weeks. Tom Bonjour soon after that. These are great people from Hoboken and musically oriented, and just subscribe and take our notifications so you can know what's going on with Hoboken Talks, the Hoboken Historical Museum's YouTube channel. We'd like to thank the New Jersey Historical Commission. They provide us with a lot of funding to keep our programs going here at the museum. This is our Shipyard Circle. And all these wonderful people are at the top donors for our organization here. We have many of we thank them so much for their generosity. We thank all of our volunteers and all of our donors, and we're very, very lucky to be able to do what we do. It's just a great organization with a lot of a great community around it. We'd like to thank Iron State. They are our number one supporter. They provide us with the space that we're in right now, and also our collection space. where we keep our objects, and we're very thankful to Iron State for what they do, and their generosity. We are sitting right now in the upper gallery amongst the photographs by Roberto Rosa III, and wonderful photos of mostly children from Hoboken's west side. I think there are a few adults, but there's also some poetry intermixed, and they are just wonderful photos. The show runs through June 22nd. Come on by. Also downstairs in the main gallery is the exhibit, The Hoboken Meadows. Yes, Hoboken used to be an island surrounded by the Hudson River and the meadowlands or marshlands or wetlands. And this is the exhibit downstairs, researched and written by Holly Metz, curated by Holly Metz. Is just a wonderful tour through what Hoboken used to be and why we flood all the time. So come and check it out. It's a really great and engrossing exhibit, really well worth your time. And that's it. Please check out our YouTube channel and subscribe. Once again, take our notifications so you can see what's going on. We love to interact with you on YouTube. We're also posting a lot on Instagram, I believe. So check us out there. And that would be it. I'm Rand Hoppy, and this is the Hoboken Historical Museum. Thanks again, Jeff and Carolyn. And we're going to take off. All right.